Hi, my name is Rachel Kramer-Bussell. I'm the editor-in-chief of Residence 11, which you can find at residence11.com. We're a website and community that celebrates sensuality, romance, intimacy, and loving in a new age of human connection. In advance of our first live event happening Saturday, February 11th, the Residence 11 Desire Summit on Sex and Relationships, we're speaking with Taylor Hahn, and the Desire Summit will be held in Los Angeles. So if you're there, please join us live and in person, and please also join us live streaming around the world. You can find out everything you need to know about the summit at summit.residence11.com. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. Taylor Hahn is a writer and lawyer based in Los Angeles. She is a graduate of Loyola Marymount University and Fordham University School of Law. The Lifestyle, which I have right here, is her first novel. And you can find out more about her at taylorhahn.com. And she is also the author of the novella, The Wedding, the Winery, and Will. And we're going to get into all of that over the next about 20 minutes. And at the Desire Summit, Taylor Hahn is going to be in conversation with Allison Moon on the topic of alternative sexuality in fiction. Make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're watching this so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming interviews. Okay, so Taylor, I'm going to ask you about your writing career a bunch, but before that, I want to know, what did you learn about sex growing up? And since we're talking about swinging, like, when were you first exposed to the idea of swinging, and how have your views on sex as a whole or any aspect of it evolved since, you were first learning about it?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, what did I learn about sex growing up? Basically, the mechanics of it, I would say, like where babies come from. That was pretty much the extent of what I learned. I remember like learning from my parents about where babies come from. And then I remember taking sex ed at school when I was in the 8th grade, which was very confusing, provided no information at all. I also remember that we were allowed to submit anonymous questions on note cards. And one of my very good friends wrote, "What is humping?" That's my most specific memory about sex ed when I was in the 8th grade. So where I really learned was from my friends in high school and from the movies, actually. I remember seeing The Good Girl, that movie with Jake Gyllenhaal and Jennifer Aniston. And I also snuck in, I'm very positive, because that movie was rated R and I think I was only 15. And there's this sex scene, and I was like, oh my God, that's what it looks like. So I did not learn about swinging at that age or when I was growing up. I would say I learned about it, just casually, like most do. But where it really became an interest of mine and where this book was, came out of was I was at a party and some people were talking about it. And I had wanted to write a novel my whole life, but I was really at that time focused on doing it. And after I was overhearing this conversation, I thought, well, that would make a pretty good novel. And that's how the whole thing got started.
I love that. I feel like the lesson for any writers or aspiring authors is eavesdrop a lot.
Yeah, exactly. That is so true. Write down crazy things that people say.
That actually reminds me, one of my favorite stories of like my career writing about sex is that one time I was at lunch with a relative and my relative went to the bathroom, and this is a family friend. And so like the family friend said, "Rachel, quick, before they get back, my husband and I are swingers." And this is someone whose kids I'd babysat, like I'd known them my whole life. And she said, "And your website has information about for like swinging parties, like links to them, but not for anyone our age. Do you have any advice or like information. And it was just so interesting to me because I did not have specific information for her, but just that she would share that with me, but not my relative, I felt honored.
Yeah.
And I do feel like there are swingers, polyamorous people, bisexual people, like all these types of people all around us, but a lot of us might not know. And anyway, so maybe we can get into more of that. But so you said you'd always wanted to write a novel, but I know your background is in law. You're a lawyer now still, and I'm especially interested in this because I am a law school dropout. So how did you go from being a lawyer to being a novelist, and how did you both, those are, I would say, probably pretty different careers, but also how did you juggle the two, and then how did you make it happen? Like, how did you get your first book published?
Yeah, it was really hard. I was motivated, to be honest, by dislike of my job. I was working I was a litigator at a firm in New York, and I was working crazy hours. I was working on cases that were, in the financial realm, and it just wasn't really my personality. I wasn't that interested in it, and I felt like this writing was a passion that I'd always had, and so I kind of viewed it as a way out, and I found that very motivating. So I would write in all of my free time. That was a big commitment, and I can't emphasize enough how difficult it was. Like, it got to the point where I said to my husband and my friends, I can't have any social life until I'm done with this book because I don't have enough time. There aren't enough hours in the day for me to work, be social, and finish this novel. And finishing the novel was the most important thing to me. So I would pretty much write all weekend. I wouldn't make any plans, and that would just be my number one priority. Of course, that did not happen every weekend because life gets in the way. Um, so there were times that I would take a significant period away from it, but I always came back because it was always really important to me. So it took about 3 years for me to finish a draft that was good enough to start querying, and then the query process took about half a year, and then the book came out a year and a half after that. So all said and done, it was a 5-year start to finish process.
Wow. I mean, hearing you say that, it made me realize just how motivated you have to be to become an author. I think whether or not you have a full-time job, like no one, unlike a full-time job, you don't have a boss. I mean, you might have
Mhm.
an agent or then an editor, but you don't have a boss in the traditional sense. And I think especially if it's your first book where no one's waiting for it except you, really, like, you do have to be motivated.
Yeah, that you 100%, you really have to want it, and you have to be willing to work through the really shitty parts of it because it's not all glamorous. It's really emotionally hard. I think most writers that I know are really, really hard on themselves. So there's this overwhelming feeling of, is this worth it? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like this isn't good. So, the number one advice that I always give to writers is that you have to actually enjoy the process because you never know what's going to happen, and it is really hard to get published. So, the best thing you could do is just assume that will never happen. Assume you will never publish this book and write it for you. And really try to find pleasure in that process, and whether it's some time to yourself or whether you are really interested in the craft and you can, approach it as a learning experience. If you try to enjoy the process, it becomes much more possible than just focusing on the end goal because the end goal might never arrive.
That makes sense. So you mentioned the inspiration overhearing this conversation at a party, but how did you go from thinking, okay, that is intriguing, to having this fully formed plot? Because your plot is about, you can tell us more, but one woman and her husband who try swinging, but it's also about her matchmaking and their friends trying swinging, and there's a whole swinger community. I mean, it's a very there's a relatively large cast of main characters. It's not just
Mhm.
well, not that all romances have like just the hero and heroine, but there's a lot of people involved. So clearly you had to really flesh out that world. So I'm curious how you went about doing that and how you knew that
Yeah.
this was that swinging and this particular iteration of swinging was what you wanted to write about.
Yes, there was a lot of evolution involved. The version that I started with is not very similar to the version that I ended with, but I was kind of obsessed with the idea of writing a novel about swinging. So there was never a question of whether the book was going to be about that. I couldn't let that part go. I just found it really interesting. There was a lot of potential there. There were so many directions that it could go because there was sex, there was drama, there was the potential for jealousy and love, just everything that I felt like would make a really dynamic novel. So that was the baseline that I started from. But then I needed to develop the actual plot, like you said. So I first made a long list of people, not real people, people that I imagined who might want to join the lifestyle and the reasons behind that. And I tried to think dynamically. Like there's no one reason why somebody wants to be part of the lifestyle. So I really tried to think holistically and come up with a lot of different reasons why it would work for someone. Um, and then once I had that list, I chose the characters that I felt their stories would, best interact and create the most tension in fiction. So the main character, Georgina, she joins the lifestyle because she catches her husband having an affair. And she thinks, okay, if you want to sleep with other women, uh, that's something we can explore, but it's going to be according to my set of rules. And she feels like it's a way for her to take back control in her life. Like he's not going behind her back. It's something that they're actually doing and exploring together. And once she joins the lifestyle, it actually ends up being much more beneficial for her than she ever imagined. So she enters it doing it to save her marriage, but what she really gets at it personally is a lot of fulfillment and a lot of growth and a new way to look at the world.
So one thing I thought was really interesting, and I wasn't necessarily expecting this. There's a lot of humor in the book, but I think it's also very heartfelt, and there's a lot of emotions. You just mentioned, people are doing it for different reasons. Some for sexual gratification and to spice up their marriages, but also to do other things. And I also thought that you explore friendships really powerfully and like what we want out of our friends and also what we want out of our friends' relationships, which is not something I think there's a lot of media, mainstream media about and other media about like how to spice up your relationship or how to make friends, but we
Mhm.
don't really talk about how our friends' romantic relationships affect us, and that's also a plot line. And that's not really a question; that was just an observation. But I was curious if you could talk about how you wrote such a juicy topic because the book got a lot of it's a buzzy topic. It's fun. Like people are like, "Ooh, swing,"
Mhm.
but you also really there's humor, but the humor is not mocking the swinger lifestyle, and I think that is really what makes the book stand out. I think it's easy to do that. It would have been easy to do that for some writers, but there's a lot of respect for both the people trying swinging for the first time, but also the longtime swingers. But there's still humor about both aspects of swinging and just the personal quirks of these people. Can you talk about balancing kind of writing humor with showing respect for the swinging community?
Yeah, that I'm glad that you feel that way because showing respect for this community was my number one priority. I think that when a lot of people who are not in the lifestyle think about swinging, it kind of conjures this idea of like 1970s pool parties and everyone's naked. um, and when I was doing my research, I and thinking through these characters and their lives, I realized how much deeper it is than that. And so I really wanted to show respect for that decision. And if someone was in the lifestyle, they would read the book and feel respected by that and not like I was making fun of them, like you said. Um, but also, swinging is meant to be fun. I feel like people wouldn't do it if it were not fun. So that was kind of the approach that I took when writing the book, is that it should be fun. And when I first started writing earlier drafts, it was more of a drama. There was more darkness in the marriages. Um, and that just didn't feel right to me. As I was writing, I felt like, no, people want to come to this novel to understand what's fun about swinging. And so if I don't portray it with humor and I portray it with darkness, no one's going to walk away thinking, oh, swinging is a choice that I might consider. Not that I expect people to read this book and then close the last page and think, yeah, I'm going to become a swinger now. But I do want them to walk away with a new understanding and understand why, people, many people make this choice.
And you mentioned doing research. Can you talk about that? I mean, did you go to swinger events? Did you talk to swingers? And were people, if you did talk to people, were they open to talking to you about their lifestyle, knowing that you would be fictionalizing, not their life necessarily, but that you would be writing a novel about swinging?
I did most of my research online. Um, it's funny because I started this novel in 2018, but by the time I was writing the draft as it currently is, it was actually March of 2020, because I was working as a lawyer up until March 2020, and then I took a little bit of a break, and that's when I really worked on this novel. So I didn't go anywhere. I don't think anyone was really going anywhere. But no, I didn't go to any clubs in person. I did most of my research online, and there's a lot out there. And I was really thankful for the people who are very open about their experiences online. There are a lot of blogs where people will write about their experiences and a lot of personal essays that I found incredibly helpful. But what I found the most useful was actually s- websites that bring together the swinging community. People are very generous with their advice, and they will write to other people who are interested in going to a party for the first time, but they're nervous and they don't know what to expect. They'll explain what to expect and what generally happens, and also provide a lot of guidance. And that was incredibly useful. I think that people in real life probably find it very useful as well, but I found it very useful as a writer. There's a scene in the book where one of the more experienced swingers is offering to be a mentor to the newbies, and he provides a lot of rules. Like, for example, he says that you shouldn't keep secrets between you and your partner, that's just going to breed a lot of jealousy, and that it's very important to be open about what you expect of your partner in the experience and what you are willing to do, and then what you've actually done, so that there's no secrets between the people that are joining the experience together. So that's just one example, but I found those online communities to be really helpful. And I also watched some videos. There was a short-lived reality show on AMC, I think, called Neighbors with Benefits. And it was about this couple that lived in kind of suburban Ohio, and they were in the lifestyle, and it followed them through their journey, and they were very open about it. I thought that was really, really interesting. So I pretty much read everything I could get my hands on. There was also not a wedding, a marriage counselor who I found I think she's based out of Dallas, and she specializes in helping couples navigate this experience. And she had written on her website a lot about what she tells the couples. And it was very cerebral. Like she talked about how it it helped in her experience couples build a lot of trust between each other, which wasn't necessarily intuitive to me in the beginning. I think I felt more like there was the potential for jealousy, and so it might create trust issues. But she wrote the opposite, that she felt that setting expectations for your partner and then having your partner respect those boundaries was a really trust building exercise. So everything that I read really opened my eyes to the experience, and it allowed me to, I think, approach this novel from a much more informed perspective.
I think that's great that I hadn't heard about that show. First of all, Neighbors with Benefits, like genius name.
I
But
know.
I'm 47, so I did not learn about swinging growing up either in pop culture. I mean, or at home, but in pop culture, I think there is more acceptance of alternative lifestyles. I don't even
Mhm.
know if alternative is even the right word, because I'm sure there's more people than we think, being part of these communities. Which kind of leads me into my next question. I mean, Lifestyle came out. It's from Vintage, right? Before I say the wrong publisher.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a major publisher, Vintage books, and it's a hardcover. I know it got a lot of mainstream press, New York Post, and other places. Um, can you share some of the reactions you received from readers, and were readers open to reading about swinging as a legitimate relationship choice? And yeah, and also, did you have you had readers who are swingers, and what's their reaction been?
um, so yes and no, people were responsive to it. Some people were, and some people were really not. And that was fascinating to observe. You probably know about the website Goodreads, which is a nightmare for writers because you go on it and people are just mean. And so it's better to just stay away from it. And I do that now. But when the book first came out, I would look at it a lot. And I found the reactions from some people to be just, I guess, not surprising, but disappointing. Like one reader called the main character a whore. And
Wow.
that just gutted me because that was the complete opposite of what I was trying to accomplish. Like I was trying to empower this main character to explore sides of herself that she had never explored before. And not just in the bedroom, not just sex, but what she really wanted out of life. And swinging was kind of a vehicle for her to do that because for the very first time, she was in an environment where she could pursue what she wanted without, being made to feel embarrassed. And it caused her to look at the rest of her life and say, okay, maybe I actually haven't ever explored what I really wanted in my life. And so to have a reaction where someone called her a whore, it felt sad to me. It felt like you're kind of missing the point, I guess. Um, but that wasn't the case for everybody. I mean, I think a lot of people enjoyed reading about this lifestyle that they probably hadn't thought that much about or had only mocked, like we were talking about earlier. So it was very mixed. Um, I forgot the second part of your question.
Swingers. The reaction from swingers, like, did the swinger community read the book and
Oh, yeah. So
okay?
speaking of Goodreads, I actually saw the best review. My favorite one that I ever got was this woman wrote that she enjoyed the novel, that she thought it was accurate and funny, but it was not as juicy as that she was in the lifestyle and that the novel was not as juicy as her real life experiences. And I think that's true. I think that's pretty accurate because this is a mainstream novel and I wanted everybody to feel comfortable picking it up. So there is sex in the novel, but it's not just one sex scene after another. It's as you mentioned earlier, there's issues of friendship and there's a lot outside the bedroom, I guess I could put it that way.
So I mentioned when introducing you, you're also the author of the romance novella, The Wedding, The Winery, and Will, and that's a more traditional romance. Can you talk about writing that and, how that process differed from writing the lifestyle. And then I am also curious, and I will say I meant to be done. I love it, but I've just been really busy. So I've not finished the book. So this may not apply, but is there at all a sequel in the works, and what, maybe a movie? I think because as I
Um,
was reading, it was definitely a novel where I'm like, I could see this as a movie.
yeah, that would be amazing. So it has been optioned for TV, so maybe fingers crossed, but that doesn't mean a whole lot. I'll believe it when I see it. Um, but The Wedding, the Winery, and Will is a novella that is not a sequel, but it is a spin-off of the lifestyle. So the character of Meredith, who is well, I don't want to spoil anything, but this happens pretty early on. So she's having a relationship with the main character's husband, and she's much younger. So I felt like I really wanted to give her an opportunity to come back from, what happened to her, because from my perspective, she was really preyed upon by this older man that, was in a position of power because they worked together and he was effectively her boss. And she was really wronged in that dynamic. So I wanted her to have an opportunity to tell her story. So The Wedding, the Winery, and Will, it stars Meredith, but it is a more traditional romance. It's not about swinging. It's about her going home to kind of heal from what happened and having a second chance at love. And that was really fun to write. It was very different from the lifestyle. So I really just enjoyed it, and I loved the character of Meredith, and I felt like she kind of got the shit end of the stick. So I wanted to give her a chance at happiness.
Oh, that's great. Well, I know I'll be reading that as soon as I'm done. And actually, that reminded me that I wanted to say about that bad review you got, that I'm very curious if the person calling Georgina a whore also said anything about Nathan, her husband, who, like you said at the beginning, is cheating on her. Like, do they care about that versus what she's doing, which is at least, I mean, not at least, which is out in the open, that they're both swinging, but with each other's knowledge.
Yeah, that's a great point. And no, the person didn't comment on Nathan, who was actually the one that had an affair.
I had a
And
feeling.
yeah, that's just everything wrong with that review.
So you're speaking at Desire Summit with Allison Moon on alternative sexuality in fiction.
Mhm.
We obviously just talked about your approach to swinging, but do you have anything else to say about how you, I don't know if vetted is the right word, but how you approached writing about a topic that swinging is marginalized and judged and shamed in our culture? I mean, as we just discussed with that review, and it's still something that I think for a lot of people, they keep secretive. Either their actual practice of swinging or interest in swinging, it's not something that you can as easily as come out about as maybe certain other aspects of swinging. That may be changing, but I don't think it's so mainstream. We might have reality TV about it, but I don't think most people would feel comfortable telling like their whole neighborhood or community necessarily that they're swingers. Can you talk about do you have any advice for aspiring authors or authors about how to write about a community like that respectfully?
Mhm. Yeah, it definitely, to your point about secrecy, one interesting thing has been since I wrote this book, I will get a lot of text messages from people saying basically that they're interested, or people feel like more comfortable approaching me about this now. And I think that just shows that there's too much secrecy because people want to talk about it, but they don't feel comfortable. They don't know who to trust. But yes, so when I started writing this novel, I did not know anything about swinging. I was just the uninformed person whose perspective was more similar to the when I think of swinging, I think of a 1970s pool party than what's realistic about the lifestyle today. So I really had to approach this novel with humility, and that would be my main advice. I had to ask myself why I had these preconceived notions and where they came from, and then challenge them. And I would say the biggest shift for me was that when I first started writing the novel, I thought that it would have negative implications on the marriages of the characters. So when I first started plotting this novel, I thought that their decision to start swinging would cause problems in their marriage. But as I started doing more research, the plot of the novel shifted to the complete opposite, where joining the lifestyle actually helped them all in different ways. Um, and I think that's because I approached the situation with a lot of empathy and humility and tried to think, okay, what are the reasons why someone might want to join the lifestyle? And even though I personally am not, I'm in a monogamous marriage, when I started writing, I thought, I don't think I could ever do that. But by the time I was done writing, I was like, I understand a lot of reasons why people would do this and why it really works for them. So having that mindset and being open minded and willing to do the research was essential.
I think that's so interesting, and I really thought that was one of the most interesting parts of the plot. I mean, it's also a juicy novel where like you want to know what happens next, but there's so many layers of relationships between spouses,
Mhm.
between people and their swinging partners, even if those are people they're only seeing the one time or briefly. I think you do a really good job of that you can still have an impactful communication and experience with someone, even if it is, we could call it a one night stand or whatever. And
Yeah.
it's not always about, I mean, sometimes it is about orgasms, but it's also about other things too. Like I just thought that was really well done. And I think that people who read it, whether they're monogamous or not, can learn a lot about the way that opening up a relationship impacts all the parties, and then in the case of the
Mhm.
book, the community of friends, because Georgina and Nathan become swingers, but so do their close friends, and there's a lot of, I mean, some good, some bad consequence, not bad, but mixed consequences in it. It seems like for most of the characters, it's not always what they expect. Like some of the ones who think it's going to be amazing and just this like sexual free for all discover that there's also jealousy and
Yeah.
other emotions involved. And I think that felt realistic. Like I'm not a swinger, but I know some people who are, and I've been in polyamorous relationships, and I do think that you really got at the heart of the fact that emotions are not something you can plan ahead for.
Mhm.
You can try, but you don't know how things are going to impact you. So
Yeah.
thank you. So what are you working on next?
I'm currently writing my next novel, and it's not about swinging, sadly. Um, but it's essentially a family drama. It takes place over the holidays. So it's pretty different, but it's still humorous and it's still about people and relationships. I think that's sort of my vibe. So I'm excited. I'm working on it a lot, but I do have a new baby, so it's been kind of tough. 5
Well,
sentences. If I can get down 5 sentences, that's like a good day.
well, if it took you the 3 years to write the lifestyle, I mean, maybe that's worth it,
Yeah.
because I think it shows that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess someone could have written it. You might have written it faster. I had no idea how when I'm reading it, but I feel like the research and the thought that went into it shows, because like you said, it's not just the juicy parts, although there are lots of juicy parts. There's also like a complicated plot lines. So I
Yeah,
hope
it's good not to
everyone
rush it.
I hope everyone will check it out. And you
Me
can find out
too.
more about Taylor at taylorhahn.com, and come hear her live in Los Angeles on February 11th, or live streaming from wherever you live. You can find out more about the Desire Summit at summit.residence11.com. Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you.